Hi, I am Dr. Gary Myszkowski, and welcome to video 4 of a 6-part video series entitled How to Select an Executive Coach Who is Right for You. This video focuses on evaluating the qualifications, experience, style, and personality fit of the executive coach candidate. Let's turn our attention to the candidates you are considering as a potential executive coach. If you are an HR professional responsible for vetting coaches, you are usually looking for several coaches who, at a minimum, have previously coached with managers or executives at a similar level to the executive that you are trying to support, and have a track record of success in coaching executives around similar presenting needs. You can add a lot of value to the executive by narrowing the field of possible coaches down to a few for the executive to further qualify. Obviously, you will want to screen them before you present them to your executive client. If you are an individual executive searching for your own coach without HR support, your best bet is to find a network of independent coaches who will help you identify your presenting need and recommend a short list of qualified, proven, and trusted executive coaches. Ideally, you should be identifying several qualified coach candidates and allow the person to be coached to make the final decision. I will explain why elsewhere. Keep in mind that some consulting firms have full-time employees who they must keep highly utilized in order for them to make money. In these circumstances, there can be an incentive to put a coaching candidate in front of you, not because they are the best match for you, but because they need to be busier. Other firms maintain a network of independent contractors who are not a fixed cost. This gives these firms a lot more flexibility in providing you with their best fit resources if they have them. Regardless of the firm, as we will say throughout this video series, buyer beware. And this video should provide some of the tools to assess whether the coaching candidates you are considering are a good fit for you. In this video, we will present a number of questions you may wish to be asking yourself or the coach candidate during the interview process. The questions also appear on the complimentary interview guide, which we will briefly review in video 5. This interview guide is available as a free download from the Wiznami.com website. So here are the typical questions you should be asking yourself as you interview each executive coach candidate. 1. Do they understand my presenting problem or need? After you briefly describe your need, does the coach ask useful questions to probe and define the need more completely? Are they asking relevant questions for greater understanding? Do they seem to be pursuing a differential diagnosis of what the root cause of this problem might be? One set of issues and not another? Do they begin to specify your need or ineffective behaviors in terms of what behaviors or interactions, in what situations, and with what stakeholders? By their questions and comments, do they offer new insights or realistic alternatives or possibilities for improvement? 2. Have they coached other executives with presenting needs similar to mine? Has this coach addressed challenges similar to mine more than once? From their experiences in coaching executives with needs similar to yours, what have they learned and what insights have they developed about what works and what doesn't work? What other hypotheses about the root causes and possible solutions do they have that they would want to test early in the coaching process? Have they worked with others at my level of management before? Some coaches have lots of experience dealing with middle managers and management skills. Fewer have had experience with VPs, officers, and the C-suite. Still fewer have coached senior executives with lots of discretionary decision-making who are attempting to lead significant change or transformation. Just because someone has coached at a certain level of management does not mean that they have experience dealing with challenges like yours. Keep probing for confirmation that they have. You don't want to be their first experience. 3. Given their initial understanding, what reasonable diagnostic process would they propose next? What would they propose as a follow-on coaching process? Unless your need is extremely situational or well-defined, such as, help me prepare for this major presentation, you will want to validate the need and make sure that the right need is identified, or the definition of the need is framed in the most accurate way. Effective performance does not happen in a vacuum. You will want feedback from other people that you must effectively interact with in order to perform your role. What does a typical coaching assignment for your presenting need look like? What can you expect as the most probable steps in the process? How do they evaluate whether the coaching relationship is a good fit? How do they evaluate progress? When is the coach no longer needed? When is the coaching process completed? When does the coach go away? How does development continue without them? Here are some red flags to watch for. Red flag: when a coach suggests that the cadence of once-a-month sessions is adequate. The typical cadence of a continual coaching process is every 2 to 3 weeks. This can vary according to the developmental actions and the frequency with which the executive can plan for and experiment with new behavior. In contrast, once a month is typically out of touch. Red flag: the coach wants to be joined with you at the hip. While selective observations of the executive's team meetings or interactions with other key stakeholders can be valuable, it is usually not necessary as a data collection technique, especially when confidential 360-degree interviews are effectively conducted by the coach, who will also do the coaching. One of my coachees told me that he had been approached by a coach candidate who declared that unless he could shadow the executive for 3 or 4 days, he couldn't be of much help to the executive. This was supposedly a standard coaching procedure for that coach. This was both not feasible and overly intrusive. The executive made the right decision and dismissed the executive coach candidate. Red flag: the coach suggests the use of a 360-degree survey and/or other assessments without at least supplementing this information with a few interviews. While not a fatal flaw, the collection of qualitative information through interviews at least gives the coach the benefit of building some beginning context within which to interpret the other information. The usual minimum interviews includes the executive's boss and the HR partner. Often, quantitative survey feedback, supplemented by only a few voluntary narrative comments, does not give you or the coach a balanced, coherent presentation of the strength or tone of the emotions experienced by the stakeholders responding to the feedback survey. When a coach is able to provide aggregate anonymous feedback, including the emotional tone associated with the words, coachees often respond with, "I sort of knew that was an issue. I just had no idea people felt so strongly about it." Red flag: the coach recommends, with the intent to minimize costs, that a less skilled professional conducts the 360-degree interviews and then hands off the feedback synthesis report to the actual coach. A lot of subtle information is collected in the interviews. That subtlety is difficult for a less experienced coach or consultant to identify, and it's also impossible to convey in a discontinuous handoff. The interviews are an opportunity for the coach to meet the executive's key stakeholders firsthand, if only by telephone. A seasoned executive coach also uses the interviews not only to probe and collect information, test hypotheses, and assess each stakeholder, but by his or her questions and discussion, actually begins to influence the stakeholder. I have had the interview respondents leave the interview confessing a much more balanced view of the coachee once I drew out their observations of both strengths and weaknesses after beginning with what seemed like a very biased or unbalanced view, either overly positive or overly negative. Red flag. The coach candidate cannot describe crisply when the coaching process is completed and when they go away. A few years ago, a well-known major corporation, considered to be pretty sophisticated, asked the participants attending a global executives meeting how many people had coaches. A significant number did. When asked how long they had been working with their coach, an alarming number of people indicated 2, 3, 4, even 5 or more years. This is not rent-a-friend, and it is typically expensive to retain the services of an effective and seasoned executive coach. The comprehensive coaching process should be results-focused, with a component for progress evaluation. When the executive becomes self-aware and self-correcting, independently of the presence of the coach is no longer necessary. As part of the process, how do they handle feedback and confidentiality? Who gets to know what? Does your coach understand the limitations of confidentiality in the typical coaching relationship? Do you? In a normal or typical coaching relationship, specific content of your discussions with the coach is not shared with your boss, your HR partner, or others in your sponsoring business. Typically, there is a reasonable expectation for confidentiality. Companies typically respect this expectation of confidentiality because the coaching process would not be very effective otherwise. However, unless you are the legally contracting party who is purchasing the coaching service, while you may be the end user of the executive coaching services, your sponsoring company is the executive coach's client. If your company is the contracting party with the executive coach, the coach's first loyalty is to your company, the contracting party. This is usually not an issue until someone takes legal action that may involve the executive coach. Again, I am addressing a rare occurrence, but you should understand the legal limitations of confidentiality in the coaching relationship. The current status of the coaching relationship in the USA, UK, and Canada, and perhaps elsewhere, is that the content of the professional relationship is not privileged. Examples of legally privileged relationships include the lawyer-client relationship, the doctor-patient relationship, the clergy person and penitent, and the husband and wife relationship. The lawyer, doctor, clergy person, or spouse cannot share information with others without the consent of the other party. Even if it is relevant to a case, a privileged communication cannot be used as evidence in court. But the executive coaching relationship is not typically considered a privileged relationship. In the unusual situation where you may be party to a legal action, investigation, or lawsuit, your coach's notes could be subpoenaed, and the coach may be subpoenaed to testify or be deposed. There are a few things a coach can do when complying with a subpoena, which can protect your privacy. One action is for the coach's lawyer to ask or motion to the judge to review the coach's notes in the judge's chamber in private to determine if any portion of those notes is pertinent to the case or legal action and is submissible or not. Just to be clear, I am not a lawyer and I am not providing you with legal advice. However, I am attempting to make you aware, in the remote possibility that you may become involved in a lawsuit or legal proceedings, that there are limits to your confidentiality with the coach, and the relationship is not considered a privileged professional relationship. As a result, discussions you may be having about other employees or business contacts that might involve possible terminations, discrimination, sexual harassment, breaking the law or a contract, or other incidents that could later involve legal proceedings should probably not be part of the coaching discussions. There are other internal processes that typically involve human resources and/or your legal department to address these issues that you should investigate and possibly follow. Or you should engage internal or external legal counsel for advice. So now that you know that there are limitations to confidentiality in the typical coaching relationship, edit your content accordingly. This guiding principle should not inhibit you from discussing the vast majority of topics, behaviors, and issues that an experienced executive coach can help you address to improve your effectiveness and ability to lead, influence, and make more informed key decisions, and otherwise contribute to the business. Apart from the legal concerns of confidentiality, there are other practical concerns about what you share with an internal or external coach. This is one of the problems facing internal executive coaches, typically HR specialists. As one executive commented to me, she was pretty good, but I couldn't be totally frank with her because ultimately I didn't know how far our conversations would travel. There is a fear that someone will implicitly or explicitly remind the HR specialist who they work for and ask them to provide some constructive insights on the executive in question. This can quickly become a slippery slope. As an external executive coach, my future is more dependent on maintaining the confidentiality of my coachee's information than my relationship with his or her sponsoring firm. As a result, I leave the control of what information, in what form, and to whom it might be distributed completely with my coachee. My understanding with the sponsoring HR executive or senior executive is that periodically I have the responsibility to inform them as to whether the coachee is fully involved in the coaching process and whether they are making reasonable progress or not. If they want more information, they will have to ask the coachee. My professional preference is to have 2 sets of books and nobody goes to jail. My first book is my version of the development plan, peppered with reminders of the feedback the executive received that they might otherwise minimize or ignore. The emotional loading of how I frame the need for change, warts and all, is often not intended for consumption by anyone other than the executive. In the second book, intended for more public consumption, the developmental actions are redefined to more politically correct statements. For example, in the first book, your direct reports say that you micromanage to the point of bordering on behaving like a control freak becomes, in the second book, continue to improve my ability to delegate and decentralize decision-making to my direct reports as a list of developmental actions reported back to your boss. Past research of the distinguishing competencies common among highly effective people in enabling roles like counseling, coaching, and mentoring is the personal characteristic of unconditional positive regard. This appears as a form of basic respect for the executive attempting to change and patience with the executive while he or she is letting go of old familiar behavior and trying to adopt new behavior. Sometimes it is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Or as a client of mine once said when he called me, "I missed another opportunity to try the new behavior this morning. I wanted to kick myself." Ask the coach candidate for some examples of how they have dealt with resistance to change from past coachees. Ask them about the times they use what they might refer to as a tough love approach and what they actually said and did. What do you want to avoid? Coaches who are too non-directive and cannot set some clear boundaries for you to work within. Or coaches who are too harsh and make you feel embarrassed or even belittled. Boundaries, limits, and feedback can be conveyed without making you feel belittled or defensive. Again, respect, patience, and consistency reign. For most coaching situations, the ultimate goal is to make you more self-aware and self-correcting. The baseline is the development plan, and you will not master it overnight. How will the coach engage you and enable you to become more self-aware and self-correcting compared with the actions described in the development plan? One reserve interview question you might ask the coach candidate: have you ever been fired by a coachee? What were the circumstances? Executive coaching as a profession is maybe at a stage of maturity of early adolescence on its best day. For a process that can be very potent if conducted effectively, there are no state licensing requirements in the U.S. typical of other more mature professions. There is a whole cottage industry that has emerged in certifying executive coaches. Everybody and his brother is in the coach certification business. Just search executive coach certification on the internet. The quality of these certification programs is all over the map. Some certification programs use training that incorporates empirical research on what works and what does not, balanced with practical experience in the field. Others look more like they were created by two guys in a truck who got full of themselves on a weekend bender. Certification is typically a rite of passage into the field. In good certification programs, there is usually training in a typical coaching process that includes diagnosis, feedback, confidentiality, development planning, progress evaluation, and follow-up coaching. Better programs also require multiple demonstrations of competency in real coaching engagements with reasonable outcomes and satisfied clients. The really good programs are highly selective, and only a select few are certified. Other programs appear to certify anybody who pays a hefty fee and passes the fog a mirror test. We are going to bypass evaluating all of these different certification programs by assuming that some form of certification is better than none, and if the coach can demonstrate that the certification process was selective, all the better. Instead, I take the traditional David McClellan approach to assessing competencies. David was the grandfather of performance-based differentiating competencies of top versus average performers. From his extensive experience, David suggested identifying the differentiating competencies leading to superior results as, however, acquired. So the focus is on the coach's capabilities that are associated with superior outcomes, and not on the journey of how someone got there. There are some people who want to become coaches, who are natural enablers, who acquire the necessary tools to apply their right stuff to the coaching process and take to it like ducks to water. There are others who have only some of the right stuff, and despite learning all of the tools, struggle to excel at coaching a broad range of people. Evidence of past successes with clients who are like you is probably your best bet. Recommendations, endorsements, and clients willing to serve as references who have developmental challenges similar to yours are encouraging and typically a validating sign that this candidate knows how to help you. In your selection interview, while part of the rapport building will be distorted by the coach trying to present themselves in the best light, selling themselves, if you will, the interaction is also a good initial indication of what they will be like to work with. Upon reflection after your selection interview, using the interview guide that you can download from the Wiznami.com website, ask yourself the following questions. Did they listen to you with patience and interest for more understanding? Beyond listening, did they offer some comments or ideas that expanded how you thought about the need or considered the possible development actions and solutions? Were they easy to talk to? Did they display accurate empathy, perceiving how you felt and not just what you were thinking? Did they demonstrate respect for you, the challenges you face, and accept those aspects of yourself that you consider to be weaknesses or shortcomings? Or did you feel unappreciated or somehow diminished by their responses to you? Were they too directive? Or were they too non-directive and not proactive enough to help you have a better understanding of your need and the possible coaching process to address that need? Did they jump prematurely to conclusions? Did the coaching process they propose seem reasonable? Towards the end of the interview, can they describe how they have already begun to adapt their typical style to yours and your apparent preferences? Adaptive coaching should be a conscious process for the coach. Western business practices have focused on removing emotion from decision-making in an effort to make decisions more rational and fact-based. One price we've paid for this, unfortunately, is a lack of appreciation for intuition and the use of unconscious processes. See more on the Silent Lightning website about executive presence, communication, and influence. More recent neuroscience research suggests that the use of these unconscious reactions and behaviors is an untapped and ignored resource that many of us would benefit from if we mastered them. The other price we have paid is the frequent decimation of passion for the business. If the candidates meet all of the other logical criteria, and you have more than one qualified candidate to choose from, trust your gut. Pick the one that you would like to work with. Your unconscious mind will know which one you prefer, and after the fact, you'll rationalize why. Maybe they remind you of a teacher who really resonated with you. Maybe they remind you of an older and wiser cousin or an aunt you could safely open up to. Maybe they remind you of a past colleague who would help you think things through, offer constructive pushback, and never tried to make the decision for you. In my clinical training years ago, after a relatively exhaustive series of diagnostic interviews and psychosocial history taking for a troubled or difficult identified client and their family, the psychoanalytically oriented psychiatrist would ask, "Did you like him?" Such a simple, final question. But if the therapist's gut said no, you were probably not the person to work with that patient. Whatever unconscious reaction or baggage you had, it would create friction instead of greasing the skids when the going got tough. In this video, we have covered a lot of ground in terms of defining the criteria and red flags you should consider when selecting an executive coach. Because this might feel a little like drinking from a fire hose, we have captured many of these criteria in a complimentary interview guide that you can download from the Wiznami.com website. Video 5 presents a brief overview of how to use that interview guide, so you might want to download that PDF file before you start Video 5. Please download the interview guide and then select Video 5.